the rancher who swore he would never love again, until a woman changed his destiny. John Matthews woke up before dawn, as he had done every day for the past 35 years. The ranch was quiet except for the soft lowing of cows and the distant crowing of a rooster. He swung his legs out of bed, feeling the familiar ache in his knees from years of labor. His small cabin smelled of wood smoke and leather, a scent that reminded him of a life built on hard work and determination. The sun had not yet risen, but John already had a list of tasks as long as his arm: checking fences, feeding the cattle, inspecting the barns, and preparing for the day ahead. For John, the ranch was more than a job. It was a sanctuary, a place where he could pour all his energy and avoid thinking about the past. Years ago, John had loved someone deeply. Her name was Clara, and she had been everything he thought he wanted in life: kind, lively, and full of dreams that matched his own. Together, they had imagined a life on the ranch, laughing over small triumphs and dreaming of raising a family. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Betrayal had cut through his heart like a cold winter wind. Clara had left suddenly, taking not just her belongings but the dreams they had shared. John had been devastated, unable to understand how someone he had trusted so completely could abandon him. The pain had lingered for years, each day reminding him of what he had lost. It was this pain that shaped John into the man he had become. He worked harder than ever, focusing on the ranch and the animals that depended on him. The neighbors admired his dedication, calling him a man of strength and integrity, but few understood the loneliness that accompanied him. His days were filled with work, yet his nights were quiet and heavy, echoing with memories he could not erase. He had made a vow to himself the day Clara left: he would never let anyone into his heart again. Love had brought only pain, and he believed that by shutting himself off, he could protect himself from further heartbreak. Despite his isolation, John was respected in town. People knew him as a reliable man, someone who could fix a fence, calm a frightened horse, or help a neighbor in need without asking for anything in return. Children sometimes ran to the edge of his property, waving and calling out his name, and he would smile, tipping his hat, but he always kept a polite distance. He had friends in a way, but they never got too close. John had built walls around himself so high that very few could ever hope to climb them. It was easier that way, easier than risking disappointment, betrayal, or loss again. On this particular morning, as the sun began to rise over the hills, John stepped outside into the crisp air. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, a quiet beauty that he had learned to appreciate in his own solitary way. He walked along the fence line, inspecting the posts and making sure none had been damaged during the night. His hands, calloused from decades of hard work, moved with practiced precision, tightening wires and adjusting gates. Every movement was familiar, comforting, a rhythm that he had followed for years. The ranch was predictable, safe, and it demanded nothing more from him than his dedication. John often thought about what life might have been if Clara had stayed. Sometimes, late at night, he allowed himself to imagine her laughter echoing across the fields, the warmth of her hand in his as they watched the sunset. But these moments were fleeting, quickly pushed aside by the responsibilities of the ranch. There was no room for regret or self-pity. Each day brought new challenges: sick animals, unpredictable weather, machinery that needed repair, and John met them head-on. In a way, his work was a shield, keeping his heart busy so it could not wander toward old wounds. He remembered the day Clara left as if it had been yesterday. She had packed her bags quietly while he was out in the barn, trying to fix a broken stall door. When he returned, the cabin was empty except for a note that simply said she could not stay. No explanation, no warning, no chance to say goodbye. The emptiness she left behind had been suffocating. For weeks, John wandered the ranch in a daze, unable to eat, unable to sleep, feeling as though the ground itself had shifted beneath him. Over time, he had learned to cope, to bury the hurt beneath layers of work and routine, but the memory never faded entirely. It was a shadow that followed him, reminding him that love could be both beautiful and devastating. The ranch itself became his constant companion. The animals relied on him, and he in turn relied on their presence to fill the quiet spaces in his life. Early mornings were spent feeding the cattle and checking water troughs. Midday, he repaired fences or worked in the fields, sweat running down his face as he pushed himself to keep the land in perfect condition. Evenings were quiet, spent repairing tools, tending to the barn, or simply sitting on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon. It was a simple life, one that offered stability and purpose, but it left little room for human connection. Neighbors often brought news or requested help, and John always assisted, though he never lingered. He had developed a reputation for reliability and honesty, and people trusted him to lend a hand. Yet, while he helped others, he kept his own heart locked away. He watched couples walking hand in hand through the town, families gathering for dinners, and he felt a pang of longing he would not admit to anyone, not even himself. Love had been cruel to him once, and he refused to let it take him by surprise again. Even in solitude, John found moments of quiet joy. He admired the changing seasons, the way rain turned the dry earth into a sea of green, or how snow blanketed the ranch in a peaceful silence. He took pride in his work, in knowing that the ranch thrived under his care. There was a rhythm to life here, a predictable cadence that he found comforting. Yet, beneath the surface of his steady routine, there was a yearning he could not name, a quiet hope that perhaps, one day, life might offer him something unexpected. John's evenings often ended with him sitting on the porch, a cup of strong coffee warming his hands, eyes scanning the horizon as stars began to appear in the sky. He reflected on the past, on choices made and paths taken, and sometimes, in the deepest moments of silence, he wondered if he had closed himself off too completely. But then he would remind himself of the pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the walls would rise again, solid and unyielding. He was safe here, on his land, with his animals, and with the memories tucked away where they could not harm him. In many ways, John had built a life of quiet resilience. He faced each day with determination and grit, honoring the promise he had made to himself. Love had been taken from him, and he would not allow it to control his life again. Yet, even as he tended to his chores and followed the routines that defined his existence, a small, quiet part of him remained alert, waiting for the world to shift in ways he could not yet imagine. Deep down, he knew that life had a way of surprising even those who thought themselves prepared. And so, as the sun rose higher and the ranch came alive with the sounds of animals and the wind through the fields, John Matthews continued his solitary work. He had built a life of strength, of duty, and of careful distance, a life that shielded him from the pain of the past. But beneath the surface, the possibility of change lingered, a quiet, almost imperceptible presence that would one day challenge the walls he had so carefully constructed. For now he worked, he endured, and he survived, unaware that destiny had already begun to stir, preparing to enter his life in a way he never could have imagined. The summer sun had climbed high in the sky, casting long golden rays over the rolling hills and wide-open fields of John Matthews' ranch. The air smelled of dry grass and warm earth, a scent that carried memories of years spent tending the land. John moved through his morning chores with practiced ease, feeding the cattle, checking water troughs, and inspecting the fences. The rhythm of his work offered comfort, a reminder that no matter what had happened in the past, the land remained steady, reliable, and true. It was during one of these mornings, as John repaired a broken fence post near the edge of his property, that he first noticed her. She came walking down the dirt road that ran along the ranch, carrying a small satchel and a bundle of papers clutched to her chest. Her hair glimmered in the sunlight, and her eyes sparkled with a quiet determination. She moved with confidence, yet there was a gentleness to her presence that immediately drew attention. John squinted against the glare of the sun, instinctively cautious. He was not one to greet strangers, but something about her made him pause. Her name was Emma, a traveling teacher who had come to the town for the summer. She had a passion for helping people, especially families struggling to find stability in a world that often seemed indifferent. Emma had heard of the Matthews Ranch and its reputation for hard work and resilience. She had come with a simple request: to observe the ranch and learn about the local way of life so she could teach her students about real-world challenges. To her surprise, John did not immediately dismiss her. Instead, he watched silently from a distance, unsure of how to respond to someone who seemed so bright, so full of life, and so entirely unlike the quiet, routine-filled world he had built for himself. The first few days were awkward. Emma wandered around the ranch, asking questions about the land, the animals, and the daily routines. John answered her politely but kept his distance, wary of letting anyone close. He was polite, courteous even, but there was a wall around him, invisible but impenetrable. Emma noticed the careful way he spoke, the way his eyes always scanned the horizon as if expecting something unexpected, and she respected his space. She had learned long ago that patience was a necessary part of understanding people, especially those who had been hurt by life. Despite his initial hesitation, John found himself observing her as she moved through the ranch with a quiet confidence. She helped mend a gate that had been damaged by the wind, carefully noting the way he handled the tools and the animals. She laughed when a young calf stumbled awkwardly, not mocking but in sheer delight at the animal's clumsy energy. Something about her laughter stirred a warmth in John's chest, a feeling he had not experienced in years. He looked away quickly, unwilling to acknowledge the strange flutter of emotion, but it lingered nonetheless. Over the next few weeks, Emma began to make her presence a subtle part of the ranch. She helped a neighbor struggling with a sick horse, offered advice on feeding schedules, and even brought fresh bread and fruit for the ranch hands. John noticed how people seemed to respond to her warmth and kindness, how her presence could ease tension and brighten moods. He found himself thinking about her when she was not around, a curious, unsettling sensation he could not quite name. It made him uncomfortable, yet there was also a quiet fascination he could not deny. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Emma stayed behind to help John feed the cattle. The barn was quiet except for the low hum of insects and the occasional snort of the animals. They worked side by side, each performing familiar tasks, yet there was a new energy in the air. John felt a strange sense of comfort in her presence. He had spent so many years alone, believing that solitude was safer than companionship, but her presence made him reconsider that belief. It was not immediate, and it was not easy, but a small crack had begun to form in the walls he had built around his heart. Emma, for her part, noticed the cautious glimmers of emotion in John. She did not push, did not ask questions about his past, but she offered a steady, gentle presence. She listened when he spoke, even in small ways, allowing him to share knowledge of the land, stories of the cattle, and memories of the people who had once been part of his life. There was no judgment, no pressure, only understanding. In this way, Emma began to teach John a different kind of lesson, one that had nothing to do with books or lessons, but everything to do with trust, patience, and the possibility of connection. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between them grew in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. John found himself looking forward to Emma's visits, anticipating the moments when she would offer a helpful suggestion or share a story from her own life. He began to smile more often, sometimes without even realizing it, and he noticed that the ranch felt lighter, somehow less burdened by the weight of routine and loneliness. His heart, which he had guarded so fiercely, was beginning to stir with feelings he had thought long dead. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled in from the west, dark clouds casting shadows over the fields. The wind whipped through the trees, and rain began to fall in heavy sheets. Emma was caught outside, and John, despite his instinct to retreat into his own world, ran to help her. He guided her to the barn, laughing as she struggled to keep her papers dry, and offered her a towel. In that moment, John realized that her presence mattered to him in ways he could not ignore. The relief he felt in ensuring her safety was accompanied by a surprising warmth in his chest, an acknowledgement that he cared deeply about someone else's well-being. After the storm passed, they sat on the porch, listening to the raindrops pattering on the roof and the distant rumble of thunder. For the first time in years, John shared a story from his past, a story about his first heartbreak, about Clara and the dreams they had shared. He did not speak of the pain in a way that demanded sympathy, but simply as a fact of his life. Emma listened silently, her eyes reflecting empathy and understanding. She did not offer platitudes or empty comfort. She merely listened, creating a space where John could express himself without fear of judgment. This simple act of listening began to break down the barriers John had built around his heart. He began to trust her presence, to accept that not everyone would hurt him or betray him. Emma did not rush him, and that was precisely what made the difference. She understood that healing and trust were earned slowly, and she was willing to wait. John, who had once believed love to be a dangerous, fleeting thing, began to see that it could also be steady, gentle, and nurturing. As summer progressed, their friendship deepened. Emma became a part of the daily rhythm of the ranch, not as an intruder, but as a companion and a support. She offered ideas to improve the fields, suggested ways to care for the animals more efficiently, and even helped John repair a section of fence that had been damaged months earlier. Her presence brought laughter and lightness to his days, and slowly, John found himself thinking about the future in ways he had not dared for decades. Despite the growing closeness, John remained cautious. He still remembered the pain of his past, the betrayal that had shaped his decision to shut out love. But Emma's steady, patient presence made him reconsider the walls he had built. He realized that life could not be lived entirely in solitude, no matter how safe it seemed. There was a risk in allowing someone close, but there was also a chance for joy, for companionship, and for connection that he had long forgotten. By the end of the summer, John Matthews, the man who had vowed never to love again, began to feel something he had thought impossible: hope. Not the reckless, naive hope of youth, but a quiet, steady hope that perhaps life could offer him more than just work and solitude. Emma had entered his world gently, quietly changing the rhythm of his days, teaching him that trust could be rebuilt, that laughter could return, and that even a heart long closed to love could begin to open again. And though John did not yet fully understand the depth of his feelings, he knew one thing with certainty: Emma had arrived in his life, and in doing so, she had begun to change his destiny. The ranch, once a place of solitude and routine, now carried the possibility of warmth, connection, and new beginnings. For the first time in many years, John felt that life had a promise he could not ignore, a story yet to be written, and a future he might dare to embrace. The days had grown longer, and the summer sun now lingered in the sky, casting a golden glow over John Matthews' ranch. The rhythm of life on the ranch remained constant, yet something had shifted. The air seemed lighter, the mornings more welcoming, and John felt a strange anticipation each time Emma approached the property. Her presence had become a steady part of his days, no longer an interruption, but something he quietly looked forward to. Emma had a way of moving through the ranch that made everything seem easier. She knew when to offer a helping hand and when to step back and observe. She could soothe a restless horse with a gentle word or a soft touch, and could explain to John, in her calm voice, how a small adjustment here or there could make life simpler on the ranch. John, who had always prided himself on his independence, found himself relying on her advice more than he wanted to admit. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but it made him feel something unfamiliar: trust. One afternoon, John was fixing a broken section of fence near the edge of the pasture when Emma arrived carrying a basket of fresh vegetables from the market in town. She waved, her smile radiant in the sunlight. John felt an unexpected flutter in his chest, a sensation he hadn't felt in years. He cleared his throat and waved back, trying to appear casual. Emma approached, setting the basket down on a nearby hay bale. "Thought you might like some fresh produce," she said cheerfully. "I know mornings out here can be long, and a good meal makes everything easier." John nodded, accepting the basket. "Thanks, Emma, that's thoughtful of you." His voice was gruff, but there was a warmth behind it that he couldn't hide. She noticed it, and her smile softened. They worked together in silence for a while, repairing the fence. Occasionally, Emma asked questions about his work, the animals, and his routines. At first, John answered briefly, as he always had with strangers. But slowly, the walls he had built around his heart began to crumble, just enough for him to share fragments of his life. "I used to have someone here," he said finally, his eyes fixed on the fence post he was tightening. "A long time ago, she left. Took everything with her, including the plans we made." His hands trembled slightly, though he tried to hide it. Emma didn't press him for details. She merely nodded, giving him space to speak if he chose to. "That must have been hard," she said softly. "I'm glad you're still standing, though. That shows strength." John looked at her, surprised by the gentleness in her words. No one had ever spoken to him like that about his past. Usually, people either pitied him or avoided the topic entirely. Emma's approach was different. She listened without judgment, offering empathy rather than advice, and it made him feel safe. For the first time in decades, John felt like he could breathe without the weight of his heartbreak pressing down on him. Over the following days, John found himself sharing more of his story. He told Emma about the early days of the ranch, the challenges of keeping the cattle fed during harsh winters, and the long nights spent repairing fences in the cold. He spoke of his father, who had taught him everything he knew about ranching, and of his mother, whose laughter had once filled their small cabin. Each story was a small opening, a crack in the walls he had built to protect his heart. Emma listened attentively, asking questions when appropriate, never pushing, always giving him the space to speak. As they spent more time together, John began to notice the little things that made Emma special. The way her eyes lit up when she spoke about teaching, the soft laugh that came when she told a story, the quiet patience she showed with both animals and people. He found himself thinking about her when she wasn't around, remembering the sound of her voice, the way she moved with confidence yet gentleness. It was confusing for him at first. He had convinced himself that love was dangerous, that opening his heart again would only bring pain. But the more he spent time with Emma, the more he realized that he was beginning to feel something he hadn't in years: hope. One evening, after a long day of work, John invited Emma to stay for dinner. He cooked a simple meal over the stove, and they ate together in the warm glow of the cabin's lanterns. Conversation flowed easily, covering topics from childhood memories to dreams for the future. For the first time in years, John allowed himself to relax completely. He laughed at her stories and shared a few of his own, feeling a lightness he hadn't experienced in decades. After dinner, they sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the night sky. The quiet was comforting, broken only by the soft sounds of the ranch, the occasional lowing of a cow, the rustle of wind through the trees, and the distant hoot of an owl. John felt a sense of peace he hadn't known he was missing. He realized that this simple companionship, this shared presence, was beginning to fill the emptiness he had carried for so long. "John," Emma said softly, breaking the silence, "you've done so much for this ranch. It's amazing how much care and love you put into everything. I can see why people respect you so much." John looked at her, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "Thanks, Emma. That means more than you know." He hesitated, then added, "It hasn't always been easy, you know. There were times when I thought I'd lost everything that mattered." Emma reached out, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "You didn't lose everything. You have this place and you have your strength, and now you have someone who cares too." John felt a sudden rush of emotion. He wanted to speak, to tell her how much her presence had changed his life, but the words caught in his throat. It was unfamiliar, even frightening, to acknowledge these feelings. Yet he felt a pull toward her, a desire to let her in despite the fear that had kept him isolated for so long. Over the next few weeks, their bond deepened. John found himself looking forward to Emma's visits, noticing her absence when she wasn't around, and sharing small moments of his day with her. He began to trust her completely, letting her see the routines and habits he had developed over decades. He showed her the best grazing fields, taught her how to care for the animals, and even allowed her to help with tasks he had always considered too personal to share. It was a slow process, but with each passing day, the walls around his heart grew weaker. One afternoon, a young foal was born on the ranch. John and Emma worked together to ensure the mother and baby were safe, guiding them through the first tentative steps. The foal stumbled awkwardly but quickly found its footing, and John watched with pride and awe. He realized that life had a way of offering second chances, in ways both big and small. Emma's presence reminded him of this, showing him that trust and love could be rebuilt if one was willing to be patient and open. Evenings became their time to share stories and dreams. John spoke of his childhood, of hopes he had once held, and of lessons learned through hardship. Emma shared her own experiences, speaking of her love for teaching, her travels, and the simple joys she found in helping others. Through these conversations, John began to see that love was not something to fear, but something to nurture, like the ranch itself. It required patience, care, and a willingness to take risks, but the rewards could be profound. As summer turned toward fall, John realized that he had changed in ways he had not anticipated. He laughed more freely, felt more connected to the world around him, and began to imagine a future that included someone else. Emma had shown him that it was possible to trust again, to feel deeply without fear of being hurt. The walls he had built around his heart had begun to crumble, replaced by a quiet hope that life could be richer, fuller, and more meaningful with someone to share it with. And so, in the golden light of late summer afternoons, John Matthews slowly opened his heart to Emma. He shared his past, his fears, and his dreams, allowing her to become a part of his life in a way he had never thought possible. With each story told, each moment shared, he moved closer to a truth he had long denied. That love, when given freely and nurtured carefully, could heal even the deepest wounds. John knew the road ahead would not always be easy. Life on the ranch was full of challenges, and he had faced hardships before. But with Emma by his side, he felt ready to face them, knowing that he no longer had to bear the burdens of life alone. Slowly, steadily, he embraced the possibility that his heart could love again, and in doing so, he discovered a strength and resilience that went beyond the work he poured into the land. For the first time in many years, John Matthews felt a sense of belonging, not just to the ranch but to another person. He understood that opening his heart was not a sign of weakness, but a testament to his courage. Emma had taught him that love could be gentle, patient, and transformative. And in that realization, he began to see that life's greatest gifts often came when one dared to let go of fear and embrace the unexpected. The crisp autumn air had begun to settle over John Matthews' ranch, bringing with it the scent of fallen leaves and the quiet promise of the changing season. The days were shorter now, and the mornings carried a gentle chill that made the rising sun's warmth feel especially comforting. John had grown accustomed to this rhythm, finding solace in the routines that had guided his life for decades. But this season was different. Something had shifted within him, and Emma's presence had become a steady light in his world. He had allowed himself to feel again, to trust again, and though he tried to deny it, he knew that she had become indispensable to him. It began one morning when John walked to the barn to check on the cattle and found that several had fallen ill overnight. A sudden change in the weather, combined with a shortage of feed in one of the smaller pastures, had caused a crisis he had not anticipated. Panic stirred in his chest, a reminder of the fragility of life on the ranch. He moved quickly, assessing the situation, administering care where he could, and calling on his years of experience to manage the emergency. Yet even as he worked, he felt the familiar weight of responsibility pressing down on him, heavier than it had in years. Emma arrived shortly after, having noticed the commotion from the farmhouse. Without hesitation, she rolled up her sleeves and stepped into the fray, offering assistance wherever it was needed. Her calm presence was a balm to John's anxious mind. She moved among the cattle with ease, comforting the animals and helping John administer medicine and tend to the sick. He watched her carefully, noting how she handled each task with confidence and empathy, and felt a surge of gratitude that went beyond words. She was not just a companion, she was a partner in every sense of the word. Despite their combined efforts, the crisis continued to escalate. The illness spread quickly through the herd, and John realized that without proper care and attention, he could lose a significant portion of his livestock. This was more than a professional challenge, it was a personal one. The ranch had been his life, his identity, and now it was under threat. He felt a familiar panic rising in his chest, the same helplessness he had experienced years ago when tragedy struck unexpectedly. For the first time in a long while, he wondered if he could handle it alone. But Emma's presence reminded him that he no longer had to. As the day wore on, tensions began to rise. John, accustomed to handling crises on his own, found himself frustrated by his own vulnerability. He snapped at minor mistakes, his patience fraying under the pressure. Emma, recognizing his stress, tried to offer solutions and encouragement, but John, blinded by pride and fear, recoiled. The first argument of its kind between them erupted in the middle of the barn, voices raised over the clatter of buckets and the anxious lowing of cattle. "I don't need help," John barked, his face flushed with frustration. "I've managed the ranch for years. I can handle this." Emma stepped back, her expression a mixture of hurt and concern. "I'm not saying you can't, John. I'm saying we can handle it together. You don't have to carry this alone." Her words were calm, measured, but John's pride would not allow him to accept them immediately. He turned away, focusing on the cattle, forcing himself to breathe through the anger and fear that churned in his chest. Emma didn't press further. She simply continued her work, giving him the space he demanded while staying close enough to help when needed. The silence between them was heavy, but it was not broken by resentment. It was filled with unspoken concern, a recognition that they were both doing their best under trying circumstances. Hours passed, and the crisis began to stabilize. The sick cattle were isolated, fed, and cared for, and John's initial panic had given way to a more measured approach. He glanced at Emma, who was wiping sweat from her brow, her hair damp from the effort and stress of the day. He felt a mixture of guilt and gratitude, realizing that his outburst had been more about his own fear than any failing on her part. He stepped closer, hesitating before speaking, unsure how to bridge the gap that had formed between them during the heat of the argument. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice low. "I didn't mean to snap at you. It's just this ranch, it's everything I have. I guess I forget sometimes that I don't have to face everything alone." Emma looked at him, her eyes soft and understanding. "I know, John." and I don't expect you to, but you don't have to face it alone anymore. We're in this together, remember." Her words were simple, yet they carried a weight that resonated deeply within him. John realized that he had been holding tightly to the past, to the belief that relying on someone else was a weakness. But Emma's steady presence showed him that true strength often came from trust and partnership. The anger and frustration melted away, replaced by a quiet relief and the recognition that he had found someone who would stand by him, even in the hardest moments. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with shades of orange and purple, John and Emma sat on the porch, exhausted but united. The crisis had been difficult, testing their patience and resilience, but it had also strengthened the bond between them. They shared a quiet meal, speaking softly about the day's events, and John found himself opening up in ways he hadn't before. He spoke about his fears, about the pressure of maintaining the ranch, and about the loneliness he had carried for so many years. Emma listened, her hand occasionally brushing against his, offering silent reassurance. Through the challenge, John learned a valuable lesson. Vulnerability was not a weakness. Allowing someone to stand by his side to share the burden made him stronger, not weaker. Emma's support had been unwavering, her patience and kindness teaching him that love and trust were not only possible, but essential for a life that was rich and fulfilling. For the first time in years, John felt a deep sense of partnership, a recognition that they could face life's uncertainties together, rather than alone. Over the next few days, they worked tirelessly to ensure the ranch fully recovered from the crisis. They repaired fences, moved feed to better locations, and monitored the cattle closely. Emma's ideas and careful planning proved invaluable, and John began to appreciate her perspective in ways he hadn't anticipated. Her presence was no longer just comforting, it was integral to the success and well-being of the ranch. As they worked side by side, John began to notice how much he had come to rely on her. Her laughter lightened the long, laborious days, and her encouragement kept him motivated when fatigue and stress threatened to overwhelm him. The experience had tested their bond, revealing both strength and vulnerability, but it had ultimately brought them closer together. John realized that love was not just about shared joys. It was also about shared struggles and the ability to support one another through life's trials. One morning, after a particularly long night of tending to the remaining sick cattle, John found Emma sitting quietly by the porch, sipping her coffee and watching the sunrise. He joined her, settling into the familiar silence that had become so comforting. For a moment they simply watched the sky, the soft glow of dawn painting the landscape in hues of gold and pink. "You know," Emma said softly, breaking the quiet, "I've seen a lot of ranches, John, but this one, there's something special here. Not just the land, but the heart behind it, and that heart, it's strong." John looked at her, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "It's been tested," he said quietly, a small smile forming on his lips, "more than I care to admit. But I've learned that even when things seem impossible, it helps to have someone beside you." Emma reached out, taking his hand in hers. "I'm here, John, and I'm not going anywhere." In that simple gesture, John felt a deep sense of relief and belonging. The crisis had tested their patience, their trust, and their resilience, but it had also shown him the depth of their connection. He realized that life's challenges, though difficult, could also bring people closer, forging bonds that were unbreakable in the face of adversity. As the days grew colder and the first hints of winter appeared on the horizon, John and Emma continued to work together, side by side. The ranch had survived the crisis, stronger and more resilient than before, and so had their relationship. John's heart, once closed off by fear and heartbreak, had begun to open fully, embracing the possibility of love, trust, and partnership. He understood that challenges were not obstacles to love, but opportunities to strengthen it, to grow together, and to discover a deeper connection than he had ever imagined. Through the trials of the ranch, John Matthews had learned a truth that would stay with him forever. Love was not always easy, but it was worth the effort. It required patience, trust, and courage. But when nurtured carefully, it could transform even the hardest moments into a foundation for a brighter, richer future. And with Emma by his side, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, confident that together they could overcome anything. The first snow of winter had fallen over John Matthews' ranch, blanketing the rolling hills and pastures in soft white. The world seemed quieter, as if holding its breath in the serene beauty of the season. John stepped outside his cabin early one morning, taking in the crisp air and the sparkling frost on the fences. He had always loved the calmness of winter, the way it slowed life down and offered time for reflection. But this year was different. The ranch felt fuller, warmer, and alive in a way it hadn't in years. Emma had become a part of every corner of his life, a presence that brought light and hope to even the coldest days. The weeks after the crisis with the cattle had strengthened both the ranch and John's heart. He had learned to rely on Emma, to share the burdens he once carried alone. And in doing so, he discovered that love could be a source of strength rather than vulnerability. Together, they had repaired the fences, improved the barns, and ensured that the livestock thrived through the changing season. But more than that, John had learned something even more profound. He had learned to open his heart again, to trust in the possibility of happiness, and to embrace the unpredictability of life. One chilly morning, John found Emma arranging a small fire near the barn, the smoke curling upward into the pale winter sky. She looked up and smiled as he approached, her eyes reflecting the warmth of her gentle spirit. "Morning, John," she said cheerfully. "I thought we could take a break and warm up a little before feeding the cattle." John nodded, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. He felt a deep gratitude for her presence, for her patience, and for the way she had transformed not just the ranch, but his very outlook on life. "Good idea," he replied, kneeling beside the fire. "It's colder than I expected today." As they sat together, the fire casting a golden glow across their faces, John found himself reflecting on how much his life had changed since Emma had arrived. He remembered the lonely mornings, the endless work without purpose beyond survival, and the heavy weight of heartbreak that had defined his existence for so long. And now he realized he had something he had never thought possible again: love, companionship, and hope for the future. Emma broke the comfortable silence, her voice soft but filled with sincerity. "John, I've seen how much you care for this ranch, for the animals, and for the people around you. But more than that, I've seen the man you truly are, strong, kind, and capable of love. You've come so far, and I'm proud to see it." John felt a lump rise in his throat. Her words were not flattery, they were truth, a recognition of the journey he had traveled, both in life and in heart. He reached out and gently took her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin and the comfort of her presence. "Emma, I don't know how to say this," he began, his voice low, "but you've changed my life. I never thought I'd feel this way again, and yet here I am, feeling more alive than I have in years." Emma's eyes softened and she squeezed his hand gently. "I've seen it too, John. You didn't just survive your past. You grew stronger, and in that growth, you made room for love again. And I'm here, standing with you, because I believe in what we can build together." The sincerity of her words struck John deeply. He realized that he had been afraid for so long, afraid to trust, afraid to love, afraid to hope. But now he understood that love was not about weakness or vulnerability. It was about courage, about sharing life with someone who would stand beside you no matter what challenges arose. Emma had shown him that, and in doing so, she had given him a gift far greater than any he could have imagined. The days that followed were filled with quiet moments of joy and companionship. They worked side by side on the ranch, tending to the animals, repairing barns, and preparing the land for the winter months. Yet, beyond the work, there was laughter, shared stories, and an easy comfort in simply being together. John found himself looking forward to each moment with Emma, savoring the small gestures, a shared cup of coffee in the morning, a warm smile across the barn, a gentle hand on his arm as they walked through the fields. One evening, as the sky turned a deep shade of indigo and stars began to twinkle above, John and Emma walked along the edge of the pasture. The snow crunched beneath their boots, and the cold air carried the scent of pine and earth. They paused at the top of a small hill, looking out over the ranch, the barns, and the distant hills dusted with snow. The world felt peaceful, perfect in its simplicity, yet John's heart felt full in a way it never had before. "John," Emma said softly, breaking the silence, "look at this. You've built something incredible here, and now you've also built something incredible in yourself. You've allowed love back into your life, and that's just as important as everything else." John took a deep breath, his eyes reflecting the stars above. "I used to think love was too dangerous, that it could only bring pain, but I see now that it's worth every risk. Because of you, Emma, I believe in it again, and I believe in us." Her hand found his, fingers intertwining, and she smiled. "I believe in us too, John. Together we can face anything." The months passed, and the winter snow deepened, covering the ranch in a quiet, white blanket. John and Emma continued their work, preparing for spring, caring for the animals, and strengthening the bond that had grown between them. With each passing day, John felt his heart grow lighter, filled with love, hope, and a sense of purpose beyond the work he had always devoted himself to. Emma had shown him that life could be richer, fuller, and more meaningful when shared with someone who cared. As the first hints of spring appeared, the melting snow revealing green shoots and buds, John realized that his life had truly changed. The loneliness he had carried for so long had been replaced by warmth, companionship, and a love that he never thought he would experience again. Emma had entered his world gently, patiently, and with unwavering kindness, transforming not only his daily life but the very rhythm of his heart. One afternoon, as they worked together to repair a section of fence near the pastures, John stopped and looked at Emma. His eyes held a quiet intensity, a reflection of the emotions he had carried for so long and the love that had blossomed in its place. "Emma," he said, his voice steady, "I know I've spent years building walls around my heart. But you've shown me that life is better when we let someone in. You've changed my destiny, and I can't imagine my life without you." Emma smiled, her eyes shining with tears she did not try to hide. "John, I feel the same. You've shown me strength, kindness, and a heart capable of incredible love. Together, we can build a future that's even better than we imagine." In that moment, surrounded by the land he had devoted his life to and the woman who had transformed his world, John Matthews understood a profound truth. Love was not something to fear. It was something to embrace, to nurture, and to cherish. And when shared with the right person, it could change everything: hearts, lives, and even destinies. Spring arrived in full bloom, bringing with it fresh beginnings and renewed hope. The ranch thrived under John and Emma's care, and their love flourished alongside it. They laughed together, worked together, and faced challenges together, each moment strengthening the bond that had grown through trust, patience, and shared experiences. John had learned that life's greatest gifts often came when one dared to take a chance, to open the heart, and to embrace the unexpected. The seasons continued to pass, and John's life was no longer defined by solitude and past heartbreak. He had learned that love, trust, and companionship could coexist with hard work, responsibility, and resilience. Emma had changed his destiny, not through grand gestures or dramatic events, but through patience, understanding, and unwavering presence. She had shown him that a heart once broken could heal, grow, and open fully to love once more. On a bright spring morning, as the sun rose over the hills, John and Emma stood together at the edge of the pasture, watching their cattle graze peacefully. The wind carried the scent of fresh grass, the promise of growth, and the quiet joy of a life lived fully and shared with someone who truly mattered. John turned to Emma, taking her hand in his, and felt a sense of peace and fulfillment he had never known. "Thank you," he said softly, his eyes meeting hers, "for everything, for being here, for believing in me, for changing my life." Emma smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "You didn't just change your life, John. We changed it together, and the best is yet to come." In that moment, John Matthews understood that his life had been transformed, not by chance, not by circumstance, but by love. The ranch, the work, and the memories of the past were all part of his journey, but Emma had given him the gift of a future filled with hope, trust, and shared dreams. His heart, once closed and wary, was now open and strong. His destiny, once shaped by loss and isolation, was now guided by love, partnership, and the courage to embrace life fully. And so John Matthews, the man who had vowed never to love again, discovered that sometimes life's greatest transformations come quietly, gently, and unexpectedly, through the presence of someone who believes in you, stands by you, and teaches you that love is the most powerful force of all.